In this video we are going to work with Amazon easy to launch templates. You know what it is, why it matters, how to use it, effectively in real environment. We'll look at the structure of the launch template, how it simplifies the instance creation, right, and where it fits into, when you're trying to keep a repeatable and scalable cloud deployment. So launch templates are mainly used for, when you use as a auto scaling group, you want to make sure that all your EC2 instances are built with the same configuration and they are consistent. But I personally, when I'm working with a client I typically do all my testing, all my configuration in the sandbox environment, and then to avoid configuration drifts to the rest of the environments, I use launch templates. For example, if I'm moving what's already working on the sandbox environment to something like a development environment or a staging environment, a production environment, then I also like to use launch templates in those cases. Okay. All right. So before we start, let's talk about the toolbox. So you are only as good as your toolbox. The tool number one would be the AWS documentation. The tool number two will be ChatGPT. All right. So let's see how we can do those two tools. All right. So let's go first. Let me just check real quick my VPC. Let's see what the VPC looks like. So resource map. So yeah, I have multiple subnets, so I'm not too concerned about it. They all have access to the internet, so that's great. Okay. All right. Let's build our launch template. Okay. So first tool here, if you want to take a look at the documentation, I'm pretty surprised with AWS, right? Really impressive the way they document everything. So this is truly useful. So okay, so let's create a launch template. All right. Let's say that we want to build a launch template for a web tier, and we want a web tier to run something like Tomcat. Okay. So template description, web tier template for Tomcat. Perfect. So look, remember we said this is typically used for auto scaling. So look at what happens here. So a lot of the settings, they are optional if you want to keep them on your launch template or not. But if you select here, provide guidance to help me set up a template that I can use with an auto scaling group, which by the way, you already have some info here that you can take a look. When you select that, what it does, it gives you the settings that are required for your auto scaling group. Okay, but I'm not building the launch template for an auto scaling group. We do that in another video. Next thing is just the template tags. These are the tags that are specific to the template. If you want to make sure that you can add some identifiers for your template. And the source template is if you have another template that you want to grab the configurations already from that template, you can do so as well. All right, so the first thing is the OS image. All right, so let me do a quick start here, and I'm gonna take Amazon Linux to the 2023 free tier eligible, and then instance type. I'm gonna take the T2 micro. All right. So very small instance, 1 CPU, 1 gig of memory. For what I want to do, it's really not that big of a deal. So here's the next setting is a key pair. If you have already a key pair, you can select it right here. If not, you can create one. So let's create one. We're gonna call it web tier key 01. I'm gonna download it somewhere. The next one is the subnet. So we have plenty of subnets here. I'm not gonna overthink this. All of them, they have access to the internet. So I'm gonna use the the first one here. As you can see, this subnet already belongs to an availability zone to US E1 AZ2. So I'm not gonna select a different availability zone here, so I don't have a conflict on my own template. You can select a security group, or you can create a new one. So let's create a new security group. We're gonna call it web tier security group 01. So web tier security group for SSH and Tomcat access. Okay. All right, let's start adding. So we have only one VPC, so we have no choice. But if you had multiple VPCs, okay, you could select a different VPC here. So let's add some rules to the security group. Let's add SSH first, port 22 from everywhere. SSH for server admin, okay, and then we're going to add 8080 from everywhere. This is HTTP access for Tomcat. Okay, perfect. All right, so you know, these are all inbound rules. So if you what's gonna happen is that this is gonna create an outbound rule that allows anything, you know, going outbound. All right. Okay, so here we have advanced networking. We're not going to use that today, but obviously, you know that there's a lot of more configuration that you can do with your networking, including adding elastic, you know, adding different IP addresses and whatnot. So let's move on to EVS volumes. Okay, so in a typical production environment, you want to have, you know, your application data and your volume aside from your root volume. I'm not going to do that here because I'm building a small EC2 instance from here. So, you know, the 8 GB root drive is plenty of storage for me, and it's free tier eligible, so that's good. So this is an interesting setting here, delete on termination, which by the way is the default for your root volume, but it's not the default for secondary volume when you're building an EC2 instance. So if you have this delete on termination to no, what happens is that when you delete your EC2 instance, the EVS volume stays there. If you want to keep the volume after the instance terminated, that's fine. But what happens is, you know, most of the time is, you know, you stop building EC2 instances and deleting them, and then you end up with a ton of EVS volumes that you're paying for it, by the way. So just be mindful of that. The next setting here is encryption. So I always encrypt my volumes. I ran a couple of tests to see if there was any performance degradation, you know, when you encrypt the volume here in AWS, and I really couldn't notice anything alarming. So you know, if it's there, use it. Okay, so we're not going to add a secondary volume, but if we have a secondary volume, there's some of the configuration that you know, it tells you that it's not included in the template, but we're not going to do that here. Let me just remove it. Okay, perfect. Resource tag. So here we were talking about the tags for the launch template, and here we're talking about the tags that we will add to the resources, to the EC2 instance that we built from this launch template. So let's do that right now. For example, we can say department. The department tag we can say is finance, for example. Okay. All right. So let's get into the advanced details. So here we have the AMI instance profile. So I already have an instance profile here, but if you haven't created one, you can create one right away. So why this is an interesting setting to be familiar with. If your EC2 instance needs to have access to AWS services, right, and you want the EC2 instance to be able to assume a role and then use that role to access those services. For example, if you have application artifacts in an S3 bucket, or if you want to access the parameter store and things like that, you want to be very familiar with how to do this using your instance profile. So let's create a new one. So I'm not going to use an existing role. I'm going to create a new role, and I'm going to say that this is an EC2 role, and it's going to be for. So I'm going to create this role to allow access to the system manager, right? So I can manage that instance, easily. I will show you later on that you can use it to connect to the instance from the AWS console. So next, let me do that. Let me give this role a name. File 01. All right. You can tag this role as well. You can add, additional permissions. So these permissions are pretty good. But let's take a look at it. For example, this here. All right. So you see, all the permissions are about using the system manager. Okay, which is good. So this is what I need for now. Okay. All right. So let me do that. Let me create the role. Here an EC2 instance, system manager. Let's give it a name. Web tier instance profile. Go to. And I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna use it later on. Let me create that role. Perfect. Okay. Back to my launch template, and I'm gonna select it from here. All right, here it is. Okay, the hostname type, I don't usually use this, right? Unless I have an DNS zone running on my VPC. So I don't add either the resources IP address as the name of the host. I think that's necessary. But, that's all the things that we can do. Instance recovery. So this is to if you disable instance recovery or set it as default, right? When the health check for the instance fails, then it's not going to attempt to recover it, right? So I'm not going to set that up, but just to let you know that option is there. Okay, the shutdown behavior. Do you want it to stop the instance or terminate? So meaning, do you want every time you shut down the instance to just delete it, or just to stop it, right? And this one here, the hibernation behavior, is the one that I use a lot. Because, for example, if I have a auto scaling group, and I'm telling the auto scaling group to scale up to 4 instances based on load. So let's say I have a website and I have a lot of requests, and my auto scaling group builds an additional 2 EC2 instances, and later on, the volume drops a little bit and it shuts down those EC2 instances. And once the volume comes back up, I don't want the EC2 instances to go through to the full startup process. So if they just if I just hibernate the instance on termination, then when they start up, they start up faster. So the termination protection basically is, if you have it enabled, then you cannot terminate the instance or delete it. It's to protect your instance. So you won't be able to delete it until you come back to the instance itself and then remove the termination protection here. Stop protection, same thing. You won't be able to shut it down. This is in case you want the instance to run no matter what. Okay. Detailed CloudWatch monitoring. Remember, CloudWatch has some, that you can activate detail monitoring for CloudWatch as well. Your credit configuration, or limited or standard, I'm not concerned about that. The placement group. So this is if you want to add your instance to a specific placement group, right? So, but obviously you have to create the placement group first, right? And then it will be show here. I'm not going to do that today either. Now here, okay, see the bandwidth configuration. Okay, but here, for example, this is your purchase option, right? This is in case you want to run spot instances, right, and save a little bit of money when you're building your EC2 instances. So if you have a workload that you're not concerned about the EC2 instances terminating, and you want to save a little bit of money, you can use spot instances. So that's, you know, that option is right there. Capacity reservation. Let me just click on the info here. This is if you want to reserve, you know, capacity for your instance. And the tenancy. This is also interesting if you want to, you know, make sure that there's a little bit more performance. If you want the instance to be on a dedicated host, or, you know, how you want to the tenancy of the instance to behave, right? Okay, so let me just keep going. Not a lot there. So the metadata accessible, this is if you want to be able to access the metadata of the instance, right? I use the metadata a lot, particularly when I'm doing infrastructure as code that I want to get information about the EC2 instance when it's built. But one thing that I always do is make sure that I use version 2 only for the metadata. That way it requires token, so that whatever service is trying to access the metadata, it needs to have, you know, be authenticated and be authorized to use it. Okay, and here we have, you know, if you want to allow your tags in your metadata, this is also very useful. Okay, and the user data. Okay, the user data is basically the script that is going to run on the EC2 instance bootstrap. All right, so let's so if we already have a ton of configuration, so let's continue configuring this. Now that's when we go to our next tool, which is ChatGPT. Okay, so let's say write a user data script on an Amazon instance. Okay, description, install the AWS Launch, and update the EC2 instance. Okay, what else? Install Tomcat, port 8080, enable it, and write a default landing page for Tomcat. Okay, sorry about the typos. Okay. All right, so okay, also want the script to log to, let's say, var log EC2 bootstrap .log. Okay, let's see what happens. All right, so here's a clean production ready EC2 instance. All right, let's see if that's true. Okay, so first thing, okay, setting up where it's gonna log in. All right, so it's gonna send all the logs to that file. DNF update system. Okay, perfect. And then install the CLI, and then check that is there. All right, then it's gonna install Amazon Corretto, Java, verify the Java is there. Then it's gonna install Tomcat without whatnot. Okay, perfect. It creates a custom landing page. I'm going to assume that's fine, and awesome, perfect. Let me take that. It's giving me some recommendations, some verification checklists that I should use. I'm gonna ignore that, because if it fails, I'm going back to ChatGPT to see why it fails. Okay, so I have already my user data. Let me create my launch template, and now we're gonna build one EC2 instance from that launch template. Launch instance from template. You remember when we were creating the launch template, there were some settings that we could, that we had the option to say do not include in the launch template. That's because now we can, add additional changes, right, to the launch template. But we have already the, the predefined settings that we added to the launch template. All right, so launch instance, and let's take a look. Let's see if we get an instance running. All right, so my instance is running. Let's take a quick look, see what happened here. So we have a public IP address. Perfect. Here is the instance profile that we created. Let me go to the security tab, and then we have the security group here. Right here are the rules for the security group. So we have an outbound rule for everything going out. Brilliant. All right, so let's take a look to see what happened with this instance. So remember that the instance profile, the setting that we added is just so the EC2 instance can access the session manager, right? It's one of the this is very convenient, right? So we can connect directly, from the session manager to EC2 instance. Okay, let's see what happened. Okay, so it is. Let's take a look at the log. Bar logs, and then EC2 bootstrap. Okay, so what happened here? Okay, so we install. So we have Amazon Corridor. Okay, perfect. So we have okay, we updated the system. Completed. All right. Okay, so look at this. So it said error, unable to find match Tomcat web app on Tomcat admin. Okay, so what do we do here? Back to ChatGPT. Hey, I got this error. But you get the idea, right? So the idea is that you can get you can get all the settings that you need for your EC2 instance in your launch template, and then you can have a repeatable process, right? Obviously, the user data script is something you need to test. And we can troubleshoot, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to do that now, but just to show, I just wanted to show you how you can use ChatGPT just to get your launch template in good shape, right? Now, obviously the script failed, so you need to test your script. Make sure the script is good, and once your script is good, then you can come back, okay, to your launch template, and then you can create you can modify your template and create a new version. And this is the interesting part, right? So let's say fix user data script, right? Tomcat didn't install. So let's say that what's happening here is alright, so Tomcat is not there. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So DNF search. Alright, so you see here, so what's really happening is that you have to say the version number 10. Alright, so that was the problem here. Let's go back. Okay, this is really Tomcat 10. Then we have Tomcat web apps. Let's take a look at it here. Tomcat admin web apps. Okay. No, sorry. We have Tomcat 10 web apps as well. Okay. So that's the error here, and then Tomcat, 10 admin web apps. So that was the problem. So so we fix the script, and then we create a template version. And this is the interesting part. Because you created a template version, it doesn't mean that this is your default version. So we go back to launch template, and if we say let's launch an instance from the launch template, now here we have, you know, a version number for this template. And you see the default is version 1, but we have a version 2, which is our fixed user data, right? And this is where we, you know, usually what I do, right, I test my version before I, you know, I make it the default template. So let's test version 2. All right, and let's assume that version 2 worked fine, and then we can come back here to our launch template and say, all right, so let's set the default version right here. And you can say, okay, my default version from now on is version 2, because that's the one that we tested, and that's the one that's working correctly. All right, so I'm just gonna leave it here, and I hope this you know, help you, and it was informative. So I see you in the next lab.